I've been driving long haul for 23 years now, seen just about everything you can imagine on the roads. Drunks stumbling out in front of rigs, elk charging across highways, people running scams by intentionally causing accidents. But this was something I still can't wrap my head around. It was about 2 a.m., and I was hauling a load of construction materials through a stretch of highway out in Nevada. Route 375, also known as the Extraterrestrial Highway. I've driven it plenty of times, and it's a lonely stretch. Nothing but desert for miles, the stars brighter than you'd expect, and silence so deep you could swear it was alive. The night was clear, and the road ahead was empty. The radio was tuned low, and I was sipping coffee to keep myself awake. I wasn't feeling particularly tired. I'm used to driving at night, but I remember thinking it was eerily quiet even for this route. About 20 miles outside of Rachel, my headlights caught something in the distance, a small figure standing right in the middle of the road. I slowed down, squinting to make sense of what I was seeing. At first I thought it was an animal, maybe a coyote. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't an animal at all. It was a child. A little boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, just standing there. He wasn't moving, wasn't trying to get out of the way. He just stood there, staring at my truck. I slammed on the brakes, the trailer skidding a bit behind me, and brought the rig to a screeching halt about 50 feet from where he stood. My heart was pounding, and my hands were gripping the wheels so tight my knuckles turned white. I leaned forward, peering through the windshield, trying to get a better look at him. He was wearing these old-fashioned clothes, like something out of the 50s. A striped shirt, suspenders, and shorts that looked too thin for a cold desert night. His face was pale, and his hair was messy, but it wasn't his appearance that unnerved me. It was his eyes. They were wide and unblinking, almost like he was in some kind of trance. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the cab. The air was cold, and the silence felt heavier than before. "Hey, kid," I called out, keeping my distance. "You okay? What are you doing out here?" No response. I took a few steps closer, my boots crunching on the gravel shoulder. "Are you lost? Where are your parents?" Still nothing. That's when it hit me. He wasn't moving. Not an inch. Not even a blink. A chill ran down my spine, and I felt an overwhelming urge to get back in the truck. I've learned over the years to trust my gut, and my gut was screaming at me to leave. But I couldn't just drive off and leave a kid in the middle of nowhere. I turned back toward the cab, figuring I'd call the authorities and let them handle it. As I climbed back into the truck and picked up my CB radio to send out a message, I glanced back toward the road. He was gone. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd lost sight of him. I scanned the area with my flashlight, but there was no sign of him. No footprints, no movement, nothing. I sat there for a moment trying to make sense of it. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. Shaking my head, I put the truck in gear and started rolling again. But the uneasy feeling didn't leave me. About 10 minutes later, the CB crackled to life. At first, it was static, normal for a remote area like this. But then I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was a child's laughter. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. I picked up the mic. "This is Rig 27. Anyone out there?" Over. Silence. "Come back?" I said, my voice shaky. Nothing but static. I turned the CB off, telling myself it was just interference. The laughter was probably some kind of weird feedback, but the unease didn't go away. I kept driving, my eyes darting to the mirrors, half expecting to see something or someone in the sleeper cab behind me. About an hour later, I pulled into a truck stop on the edge of town. I parked under the bright lights, locked the doors, and tried to shake off the nerves. The next morning, I went over my dashcam footage, hoping it might shed some light on what I'd seen. I figured it would show nothing, just an empty road. But it didn't. The footage clearly showed the boy standing in the middle of the road. His face was pale, his clothes old-fashioned, just like I remembered. And then, in the very last frame, as I climbed back into the cab, there he was again, not on the road, in the sleeper cab, standing right behind the driver's seat, staring at me through the camera. I reported it to the local sheriff's department, and they sent someone out to investigate. They didn't find anything, no signs of a child, no missing person reports, nothing. The deputy looked at me like I was crazy, but when I showed him the dashcam footage, his face went pale. "I've seen a lot of strange things out here," he said, his voice low. "But this is something else. To this day, I don't know what I saw or how to explain it. All I know is I'll never forget that boy's face or the sound of his laughter on the radio. And every time I drive Route 375, I can't help but glance in the mirrors, half expecting to see him there again. I wanted to share something that happened to me a while back. It's taken me some time to process it, and honestly, I'm still not sure what to make of it. But here goes. A few months ago, my family moved to this small town in Australia. My dad got a new job here, and it seemed like a good change for all of us. The town's pretty quiet, not much happens, and for a guy in his early 20s like me, it can get pretty dull. One afternoon, after binge watching some shows and feeling the weight of boredom pressing down, I decided to take a walk and explore the area. Maybe find something interesting to do or at least get a lay of the land. I grabbed my jacket, told my folks I'd be back in a bit, and headed out. The town's main streets are pretty standard. Shops, a couple of cafes, the usual. But as I wandered further, I noticed fewer houses and more open spaces. Eventually, I stumbled upon this old, abandoned warehouse. It was massive, with faded paint and broken windows. The kind of place that would be a gold mine for urban explorers. Curiosity got the better of me. I approached the building, noticing that the main door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, and it creaked loudly, echoing in the vast emptiness inside. The air was musty, filled with a scent of decay and neglect. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of old machinery, stacked crates, and forgotten relics. Light streamed in through the broken windows, casting eerie shadows that danced on the walls. As I ventured deeper, the sounds from outside faded, replaced by an unsettling silence. I don't know what I was expecting to find. Maybe some old equipment, graffiti, or signs of previous visitors. But the further I went, the more off things felt. I started hearing faint noises, like whispers. But whenever I stopped to listen, there was nothing, just the sound of my own breathing. At one point, I turned a corner and saw a figure standing at the far end of a long corridor. My heart skipped a beat. It looked like a man, but his features were indistinct, blurred somehow. I called out, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked through a doorway. Against my better judgment, I followed. The room I entered was vast, with high ceilings and rows of shelves filled with dusty boxes. The figure was nowhere to be seen. As I walked between the shelves, I felt a sudden drop in temperature. My breath became visible, and a chill ran down my spine. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there, just shadows. I told myself it was probably animals, or maybe even other people exploring. But deep down, I felt something was wrong. I decided it was time to leave. The sun was setting, and the last thing I wanted was to be stuck in this place after dark. As I retraced my steps, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to be saying my name, beckoning me deeper into the warehouse. Panic set in. I started to run, not caring about the noise I was making. I just wanted out. But the more I ran, the more disoriented I became. Corridors that should have led to the exit took me deeper into the building. Doors that were once open were now locked. Finally, after what felt like hours, I burst through a door and found myself outside. The cool evening air hit my face, and I gulped it down, relieved to be free from that oppressive atmosphere. I didn't look back. I just ran until I reached the main road and saw other people. I haven't told anyone about this until now. Part of me wonders if I imagined it all, but it felt so real. I've had nightmares about that place since, and sometimes, when I'm alone, I swear I can still hear those whispers. I'm not sure what that warehouse was or what I experienced inside, but one thing's for sure, I'm never going back there again. I didn't think much of the job when I first took it. It was just another line on my growing list of ways to keep myself afloat while finishing college. Rent was due, textbooks were ridiculously overpriced, and I was desperate. So when I saw the flyer for a nighttime security guard position at a local graveyard, I figured, how hard could it be? The interview was straightforward. An older guy named Mr. Harlan ran me through the basics. Sit in the office, make rounds every hour, and report anything unusual. He assured me it was an easy gig. A lot of folks are creeped out by graveyards, but there's nothing to be scared of, he said with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. I laughed along, pretending I wasn't one of those people. The pay was decent, the hours fit around my class schedule, and the job itself seemed simple enough. But I'd be lying if I said the idea of spending my nights in an old graveyard didn't make my skin crawl. Still, I was broke, and beggars can't be choosers. My first night started quietly enough. The graveyard was remote, surrounded by dense trees, and the only light came from the small office and my flashlight. The place had this stillness about it. Not peaceful, more like the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes you hyper-aware of every little sound. The office was tiny, just a desk with a clunky old computer, a few monitors hooked up to grainy security cameras, and a coffee maker that looked older than me. Mr. Harlan gave me a quick tour before leaving me alone. "Don't let your imagination get the best of you," he said as he handed me the keys. At first, I was fine. I did my rounds, walking the gravel paths between rows of headstones. Some were so weathered, you could barely make out the names. Others had fresh flowers or little trinkets left by loved ones. I felt a little uneasy, but I chalked it up to first night jitters. It wasn't until my second night that things started feeling off. Around 2 a.m. during my second round, I heard footsteps. I froze. It sounded like someone walking on the gravel path a few rows over. My first thought was, okay, maybe a visitor stayed past closing. But when I called out, "Hey, the graveyard's closed," there was no response. The footsteps stopped. I shone my flashlight in the direction of the sound, but there was nothing there. Just rows of headstones and that suffocating darkness between the trees. I told myself it was probably an animal, maybe a raccoon or a stray dog. But then, as I turned to head back to the office, I heard it again. Footsteps, this time closer. I spun around so fast, I almost dropped my flashlight. "Hello?" My voice cracked, echoing into the silence. No answer. By the time I made it back to the office, my hands were shaking. I double-checked the camera feeds, but the grainy footage showed nothing unusual. That night, I didn't sleep when I got home. The third night was worse. I was doing my rounds, trying to keep my mind occupied by mentally reviewing notes for an upcoming test, when I noticed something odd. One of the headstones had fresh flowers in front of it. Nothing weird about that, except I distinctly remembered that same grave being bare during my earlier round. Maybe I missed it, I thought, though I knew I hadn't. I knelt down to look closer, and that's when I noticed the flowers were wet, like they'd just been pulled from the ground. The dirt clinging to the stems was fresh. My chest tightened as I stood up, scanning the area with my flashlight. Again, nothing. But when I turned to leave, I heard a whisper. It was so faint, I almost convinced myself I imagined it. But then it came again, clearer this time. A single word, stay. I don't think I've ever run so fast in my life. When I burst back into the office, I locked the door and sat behind the desk, my heart pounding. The camera feed showed the same grainy, uneventful footage as always. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was just tired, but deep down I knew that wasn't true. The final straw came on my fifth night. It started with the usual footsteps during my rounds. By this point, I'd learned to ignore them, or at least pretend to. But then, as I passed one of the older sections of the graveyard, my flashlight flickered and went out. "Great," I muttered, tapping it against my palm. It came back on after a few seconds, but when the beam lit up the path in front of me, I froze. A shovel was lying in the middle of the path. It hadn't been there before. Slowly, I approached it, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The shovel looked ancient, its wooden handle splintered and its blade rusted. And then I noticed the fresh, damp dirt clinging to the blade. I turned to look around, and that's when I saw it. A figure, standing a few rows away. It was tall and thin, its face obscured by the shadows. For a moment I thought maybe it was another grave marker, but then it moved. I didn't stick around to see what it was. I sprinted back to the office, locked the door, and called Mr. Harland. He didn't answer, so I left a message. "I'm done. I'm not coming back." That was the last time I stepped foot in that graveyard. To this day, I can't explain what I saw or heard. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe it wasn't. All I know is, some things are better left alone. My buddy Matt and I decided to go hiking and camping a couple weeks ago. We both live in the city, and life has been crazy, so we thought a weekend away from it all would be nice. Reconnect with nature and just chill out for a bit. Anyway, it was supposed to be a normal trip, but things got weird, like really weird. We drove out Friday morning to this trail Matt read about online. It wasn't one of those super popular ones, which is what we wanted, something quieter, more peaceful. The first day went great. We hiked a good few miles, set up camp near a little creek, and just hung out. It was so quiet out there. No cars, no people, just the sound of birds in the water. It was honestly perfect. We cooked some food, talked about random stuff, and crashed early because we were both beat. The second day started off the same, just hiking and taking in the scenery. Around midday, we came across this weird little clearing. It wasn't on the trail map or anything. In the middle of the clearing was this shrine, I guess. That's the best way I can describe it. It wasn't like a proper building or anything. It was just a bunch of rocks stacked up in a circle with all these little trinkets inside. Some were tied to the rocks and others were just sitting there. There were old coins, pieces of wood with carvings, little dolls made of twigs, stuff like that. I don't know why, but the whole thing gave me a bad vibe right away. It didn't feel like something you were supposed to mess with, you know? I told Matt we should just keep walking, but he thought it was cool. He started looking at the stuff closer, and before I could stop him, he picked up one of the little wooden carvings. It was shaped like a person, but the face was all wrong. It had these weird, sharp features that didn't look human. I told him to put it back, but he just laughed and said, "What? You think I'm gonna get cursed or something?" Then he set it down, but I swear, I think he put it in a different spot than where he found it. We didn't stick around long after that. I was pretty freaked out, and I guess Matt could tell because he finally agreed we should keep moving. The rest of the hike that day felt off. The woods seemed quieter than they had been before. No birds, no wind, just silence. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. When we set up camp that night, I was on edge. Matt kept joking about the shrine and how I was being paranoid, but even he seemed a little jumpy. We ate dinner and tried to relax, but I couldn't stop listening to the woods around us. Every little sound made my heart race. Eventually, we both went to bed, but I don't think I ever really fell asleep. Around midnight, I heard it. Footsteps. At first, I thought maybe it was an animal, but these were too heavy. They sounded like a person walking around the tent. I froze and didn't say anything at first. Just listened. Then Matt whispered, "Do you hear that?" I was so relieved I wasn't imagining it, but also terrified because it meant something or someone was really out there. The footsteps kept circling the tent, slow and deliberate. Matt grabbed the flashlight and unzipped the tent a little to shine it outside, but there was nothing there. No shadows, no movement, just trees. He zipped it back up, and that's when we heard it, the laughter. It was faint at first, like it was coming from far away, but it got louder and closer. It wasn't just one person either. It sounded like a group, but the laughs weren't normal. They were high-pitched and distorted, like someone trying to imitate laughter but doing a terrible job at it. Then came the whispers. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but they were all around us, like whoever or whatever it was had surrounded the campsite. Matt and I just sat there, too scared to move or even breathe. I could feel my chest tightening, like I was having a panic attack. The sounds went on for what felt like hours, but it was probably only a few minutes. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. No footsteps, no laughter, no whispers, just silence. Neither of us dared to go outside the tent. We just sat there, clutching our knives like those would have helped and waited for the sun to come up. As soon as it was light enough to see, we packed up our stuff as fast as we could and got the hell out of there. We didn't even eat breakfast or anything. We just wanted to leave. The hike back to the car was the longest 3 hours of my life. The whole time I felt like we were being watched, but every time I looked back, there was nothing there. When we finally got to the car, we threw our stuff in the trunk and sped off without looking back. We haven't talked about it much since then, and I don't think we ever will. Whatever that was, it wasn't normal. And I don't ever want to experience anything like it again. So yeah, that's what happened. I don't know if anyone else has ever come across that shrine or experienced anything like this, but I can tell you one thing, I'm never going back to those woods.